Okay, so welcome back. You may notice a slightly different video format. Unfortunately, my microphone for the OneNote is not working anymore, and it's going to take a few days before I get another one. So, all right, so here's our next section, which is on completing the square. Before we do that, we just want to finish up the exercise I gave from last time, which was to solve the following equation, where A was 6, B is minus 7, and C is minus 3. So notice that A times C is negative 18. So if we make our diamond shape here, we would want two numbers that multiply to negative 18 and that add up to negative 7. And if you think about it, negative 9 and 2 do the trick. Negative 9 times 2 is negative 18. Negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7. So we can rewrite this negative 7x as minus 9x plus 2x minus 3 being 0. And what we do now is we factor two terms at a time to get the final factorization. So from the first two terms, we have a common 3 and an x to leave us with 2x minus 3. In the second two terms here, there is nothing in common, but we can always factor out a 1. And once you do this stage, you always should have these two as the same, and they are the same. And so we have 3x plus 1 times 2x minus 3, giving you 0. So either 3x plus 1 is 0, or 2x minus 3 is 0. Here you get x is minus 1/3, and here you get 3/2. So these are our two solutions for this equation. So we're going to jump now into completing the square. And our first example will be x squared plus 10x minus 3 giving 0. Now, first of all, the first thing to note is that this does not factor. If it did factor, we would factor and then solve that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the following, which is to simply look at the first two terms, and we're going to kind of leave the negative 3, the constant term, alone. And you always are going to do this. So what is the procedure here? We consider the middle term, the x coefficient, which is 10. We're going to take half of that, which is 5, and then we're going to square that. So b over 2 squared is 5 squared, which is 25. So this is kind of off to the side. A lot of times, once you get used to it, this part will probably be done in your head. Taking a half of 10, which is 5, squaring it is 25. And what you're going to do is you're going to add 25, and you're going to subtract 25. Now you might think, okay, well, why should we do that? Well, first off, if we do that, the end product is adding 0, and we don't want to change the problem. So it makes sense to have something where you're not changing the problem. So you're adding 0. But it turns out that this actually makes this problem look a little nicer, because this first three terms, the x squared plus 10x plus 25, this factors to x plus 5 squared minus 28. Well, that factors to x plus 5 squared, and the remaining piece here is minus 28. And the key thing to note is it always works out that way, where these two numbers, this 5 corresponds to this 5. So this b over 2 always turns out to be the guy that you add to x and square. And you'll see that pattern over and over once you do this, a little bit more. And that completes the completing the square process. The rest is to solve the equation. But the completing the square process is this process where you add and subtract and then factor. So let's finish the problem and solve. So we have x plus 5 squared being 28. Well, it may be a good time to recall that if you had y squared is 28, that would mean that y is plus or minus root 28. Here we have x plus 5 squared being 28, which means x plus 5 is plus or minus root 28. Okay? Or x equals negative 5 plus or minus root 28. Just to maybe see it in one more way, if you have x plus 5 squared is 28, and you take the square root of both sides, you end up with the absolute value of x plus 5 being root 28. Just like here, if you took the square root of y squared being the square root of 28, you would end up with the absolute value of y being root 28. And if you have an absolute value equaling a number, that means whatever's inside the absolute value must be either plus or minus what's on the right side. So either way, at the end of the day, you get negative 5 plus or minus root 28. So you have two solutions. Again, this is a compact way of writing two numbers, negative 5 plus root 28 as well as negative 5 minus root 28. So that completes that problem. I'll leave you guys with an exercise to try, which is again to solve for x by completing the square. X squared minus 18x minus 8 being 0. And you'll solve by completing the square. It'll be a very similar process, just different numbers. And we'll go from there next time. Okay, that's it for now.